Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss our Foreign Secretary's performance yesterday in front of MPs, evading questions about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And when he couldn't be bothered to evade a question in the usual way, by rambling on about something else, he simply referred to any question put to him by a non-Tory MP as being partisan. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So the mess over Afghanistan is being described in the UK as the worst foreign policy disaster since Suez. And one of my favourite bits, I think, of the proceedings came when Raab said that he struggles with the Suez analogy. Unfortunately, we lack MPs who can seize on moments like this. It needed to be pointed out that this struggle he has is exactly why he made what was already a crisis pretty much worse. People who cannot grasp even simple concepts cannot lead us through complex problems. But on to the real meat of it. At the start of the proceedings, Raab indicated that he would be going to Afghanistan straight after the briefing, or the region, the Afghanistan region. And I thought to myself, was his punishment for being generally bog useless to be airdropped into Kabul? I suspect not. I'm going to hazard a guess that the Afghanistan region he referred to will probably just be a holiday resort somewhere. Not even in a neighbouring country, I wouldn't have thought. Because, somewhere within 1,000 miles maybe. But when it came to the actual questions, it will come as no surprise that he followed the same routine as Boris Johnson does in such situations. Not so much with the waffle, I don't think that's Raab's style, but with not answering the question, basically. I remember getting a practice chemistry paper back once, where the teacher wrote on it, "This is a well thought out answer to a completely different question." I think such was the case with Raab. The responses simply did not fit the questions. He was trained to parrot a few lines and just repeat them no matter what was asked him. And that's a common political trick. Like all politicians, when faced with tricky questions, he just made up his own questions. But even then, the answers weren't terribly good. He doesn't know how many people have been left behind, how many British citizens have been left behind in Afghanistan, but he reckons it's in the hundreds, probably the low hundreds. And I thought, really? Because the number left behind, as reported by the small number of MPs that I follow on social media, would immediately add up to over 1,000. And I would suggest it's in the high number of thousands, were there to be a proper audit. It might also be a good point to add that a few days ago, it transpired that the Foreign Office had not actually read any of these emails. So British MPs had been contacting Raab's department, the Foreign Office, on behalf of their constituents who were trapped in Afghanistan. And it turns out not only was nothing being done about this, these emails weren't even being read. Yet Raab had the nerve to say the previous day in an interview that his department was the top performing government department at this time. Now, ordinarily, I would say that would represent a sad indictment of the rest of the government, but the Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, actually did come out with some credibility from this. Frankly, the only minister to have done anything even vaguely useful all year. But without even getting into speculation, an MP asked Raab what precisely he meant about the numbers who would be left behind. Raab said it was difficult to calculate, but that they had succeeded in getting the overwhelming number out. Now, if you don't know how many people are left behind, I accept you can know how many people you've evacuated, but if you can't know how many you've left behind, how can you make any statement at all about how many you've evacuated as any sort of comparative? He also refused to say why he went on holiday at the same time as the United States were pulling people out. What I also found odd was that he defended the intelligence that suggested the Taliban would take over slowly and could not capture Kabul this year. But later on, when it was put to him that the US were warning that they could take the entire country, he responded, yeah, that was already known in the intelligence. Which is it? Was the complete takeover of the country given as a possible outcome? Never mind most likely outcome. He will have been given the range of them. Was it one of the possible outcomes in the intelligence that he had, or was it considered not at all possible this year, as Boris Johnson informed Parliament before the summer recess? There is no clearer sign of a politician talking crap to further some cause, in this case saving his own skin, than to contradict yourself in the same interview. In fact, the worst part of this whole fiasco was that Raab simply had no clue what was happening. A Tory MP pointed to a report from July that warned of a rapid rise of the Taliban, and Raab indicated that he hadn't even realised that his own department wrote this report. Of course not, because he doesn't read his briefs. Hasn't a clue about what's happening in his own department, even though his officials write it all down for him. If that's not a reason to get rid of him, I do not know what is. And quickly, before we get another Suez-level crisis on our hands. He also said at one point that he wanted to visit Pakistan to discuss the situation, but was prevented by COVID. Oh, terrible shame, couldn't actually go. And you might say, well, fair enough, yeah. I mean, that's a good reason not to physically visit Pakistan. Except that one of his colleagues, Alex Sharma, famously jetted all over the world this year. He's been all over the place, including to a number of COVID red list areas. So whatever his reason for not physically visiting Pakistan, and I'm not going to suggest he should have done when phones are a thing, it is not that he wasn't allowed. And concerning his holiday, he wasn't even able to say when he went on holiday. He just kept saying that he'd given a full statement about the holiday. Well, he hadn't. Otherwise, the questions, the answers to that question would be a matter of public record. As it happens, we know when he went on holiday, but he needed to say so officially, and he didn't want to say so officially because that would invite the devastating follow-up questions. Leave was cancelled for UK military personnel in July, but the Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister were still allowed their leave. It seems the least they could do was to answer simple questions about the nature of it. I cannot personally abide so-called leaders who refuse to lead by example and then get irritated when asked questions that query why they don't lead by example. He told another MP that he wasn't going to get into a fishing expedition over the details of his holiday. What? Was he fishing as well as paddleboarding while Kabul fell? I mean to say, we're not talking about vexatious questions asked by a hack journalist for lols. These are MPs. Sure, a lot of them were opposition MPs and there's a political dimension to their questions, but they're MPs, the public's elected representatives at a parliamentary committee hearing. What possible reason can there be for not giving a straight answer to a straight question on something as simple as the date he went on holiday? The only answer to that question can be because he knows it will be politically damaging for him to do so. At one point, Raab said that he was working with allies to put pressure on the Taliban to let people out. Okay. Would this be the same Taliban who posed for photos in a British building with UK and US police officers' helmets on their desk? I'm not sure they're interested in doing anything as a result of pressure from this pointless moron, quite frankly. Also, which allies would that be? He hadn't had a single conversation with any foreign minister of any neighbouring country in 6 months, according to reports. Which allies do we have who can help us pressure the Taliban, who have just kicked out the most powerful military on earth from the country? Actually, which allies do we have for anything right now? There were some questions around recognising the Taliban as well. Now, I seem to remember reading a report at the weekend that Johnson might offer to recognise their government in return for various things that basically designed to make him look less stupid, basically. Now, I'm not sure about the full truth of that. Again, what's posted in newspapers is not necessarily government policy. Raab was cautious on the question, as I would expect any foreign minister to actually be, when it came to the government's relationship with the Taliban. But on the subject of Al-Qaeda, he did say that the Taliban had promised not to assist terror networks. I mean, there was an attack on the airport, widespread reports of them going house to house to arrest those who had spoken out against them or worked for the previous government. They are a terror network, for goodness sake. Or does he only mean terror networks that destroy buildings and lives in the Western world? Oh, you can do it. You can do it over in the Middle East. We don't care about that. When he was asked if he'd considered resigning, he said his focus was on getting on with the job. What? He went on holiday after being told not to by officials. He was then recalled from that holiday when what had already been predicted started to kick off big time. Predicted by his own department, by the way. He then whined like a spoilt brat and got a note from the Prime Minister saying he could carry on with his holiday after all. But yeah, sure, he was focused on getting on with the job. Finally, something I couldn't say at the start of the video because of YouTube rules, but it's fine if you do it later on. Dominic Raab is an entitled little shit if ever I saw one. I will say this about our most senior government ministers. Boris Johnson is a nasty piece of work. He presents this act of being a foppish buffoon, which should still not be the sort of persona that gets you elected in a functioning democracy, but which actually masks a ruthless megalomaniac. He doesn't particularly intend harm on others. He just doesn't care if any harm is inflicted on them, and he won't lift a finger to help even if it takes minimal effort. Then we have Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. She does intend harm to others. She is also a nasty piece of work, but in a very different way. She is so unpleasant that she was ordered to keep quiet during the general election campaign. The surest way to make sure the Conservatives lose the next general election would be to join the Tory party en masse and make sure she wins the leadership contest when Johnson falls. Rishi Sunak is also a fairly nasty piece of work. One of the bankers very much behind the financial crash over a decade ago, from which he made a lot of money, and cynically laying low to avoid the political mud sticking to him from the failures of this government. The vast sums of our money that have been spent on dodgy donors and mates, you know, all those PPE contracts that didn't return any PPE and we haven't got the money back, all signed off by him. Every penny the government spends is on his books and under his scrutiny. But then we have Dominic Raab. I do not know that I have seen anyone so conceited and yet so empty-headed at the same time. He is actually more vacuous than Donald Trump, but just as arrogant. In politics, women unfortunately get treated very differently to men by some politicians. You know, we have the term mansplaining for this sort of behaviour. Raab is famous for talking down to female MPs in a way that he doesn't with male ones. Yes, he can be combative with opposition male MPs, but he's outright dismissive of female ones. And I felt that that was on show in this hearing as well. A wearied sigh whenever asked questions from opposition female MPs. As if to say, look, you don't understand, and it's really not worth my time trying to explain it to your pretty little head. You know, just in terms of personality, not specifically politics, just personality, Raab has to be one of the sleaziest, slimiest members of the government. And I only say one of, because Jacob Rees-Mogg is also in there. But I accept that that is just my subjective opinion of him. There may be others who can watch Dominic Raab and not have their skin crawl. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.